The farmhouse smelled like pine cleaner and old coffee. Cold ash sat in the fireplace. Daniel's voice cut through the still air, reading Dad's will. Page after page, my name never came up. Before I tell you how everything changed that day, let me know where you're watching from. And subscribe if you believe sacrifices deserve respect, even when family forgets. Not for the land, not for the savings, not even the cedar chest Mom promised me at 15. Beth leaned back, nails tapping the table. Her perfume, sweet vanilla, heavy musk, filled the room. She smirked, eyes sharp. You always said you didn't need roots, Nora. Daniel didn't look at me. His hand clicked Dad's fountain pen, over and over. Dad knew you'd land on your feet. You're strong. We'll take care of the farm. Strong. Like it excused erasing me. Like 20 years in uniform meant nothing. Like wiring half my paycheck home was just a hobby. My hands tightened around the chair. Outside, rain hit the porch in soft, steady taps. The diesel smell from the farm truck drifted in. I stared at the floorboards, every nail head shining in the dim light. No words came out. Just a deep, hollow ache. I stepped outside. The air was damp, cold enough to sting. The sky was heavy, gray. Across the wet fields, something stirred. Low, rhythmic, a sound I knew by heart. Rotor blades. Faint, but growing closer. My pulse jumped. Beth and Daniel still laughed inside. They didn't hear it yet. But they would. I stood on the porch, dog tag warm in my pocket. Every sacrifice, every deployment, every long night at the VA, all of it had led here. Not for the land. Not for them. But for me to finally matter. Would you forgive? Or fight for your name? Comment 1 or 2. Because when those blades hit the field, everyone in that house will stand still. The rain followed me back to Harrisburg. Gray streets, slick sidewalks, streetlights flickering against puddles. The hospital sat quiet, except for the low hum of the night shift. I slid my VA badge across the scanner. The beep felt colder than usual. Like even the walls knew I didn't belong anywhere anymore. The locker room smelled of bleach and stale coffee. My scrubs hung limp, wrinkled from another 12-hour shift. I stared at the small photo taped to my locker door. Me, in uniform, Dad and Mom smiling beside me. Someone had flipped the frame upside down last week. No one admitted it. Maybe they thought it was funny. Maybe it wasn't. I sat on the bench, boots squeaking on the wet tile. My phone buzzed on the metal beside me. Marcus. His name lit up the cracked screen. I didn't answer yet. I just listened to the rain tapping against the high windows. The hospital smelled like every deployment I ever came back from. Cold, clean, a little empty. A place where you keep moving because stopping feels heavier than pain. I thought about the farm. Every year, I sent home checks, paid the overdue taxes, covered the new roof, the busted truck, Beth's tuition when she changed majors twice. I told myself it was for Dad, for the legacy he wanted to keep alive. Turns out, that legacy had a different name on every line. And none of them were mine. I rubbed my thumb over the edge of my dog tag. The grooves felt deeper tonight. Like they were reminding me I'd earned something real, even if no one else cared. Marcus texted. Need to talk. Not about the will. About you? I exhaled slow, staring at the screen. He didn't owe me anything. He never sugarcoated bad news either. If he said it wasn't about the will, it had to be big. I shoved the phone into my pocket. The overhead lights flickered once, humming louder. Somewhere down the hall, a patient monitor beeped, sharp and distant. My shift hadn't even started yet, but the weight in my chest felt heavier than the gear I wore overseas. I stood, grabbed my stethoscope, and walked out into the fluorescent glow. One more night. One more reminder that home didn't mean the farm anymore. By midnight, the halls went quiet. The smell of disinfectant clung to the air, sharp and sour. Only the buzz of old ceiling lights kept me company. I leaned against the nurse's station, eyes heavy. The wall clock ticked loud, each second dragging like an anchor. Beth once said I loved night shifts because I had no life. Maybe she was right. But at least the patients didn't pretend to love me, then erase me. My phone buzzed again. Marcus. This time I answered, voice low. Yeah. Got something you need to see, he said. His tone was steady, like back in Kandahar when we lost power mid-surgery. I gripped the phone tighter. If it's about the farm, don't bother. It's not. Your father left more than a will. Check your email. Printed copies in your old trunk at the farmhouse. My breath hitched. The cedar chest. The one Mom promised me, now in Daniel's storage room. They told me it was empty, just sentimental junk. Guess that was another lie. I'm on shift, I murmured. Then swing by tomorrow, Marcus said. This isn't just paperwork. It's something they don't want you finding. Trust me. He hung up before I could ask more. The line clicked dead, leaving only the hum of the lights. I stared at my reflection in the dark monitor. Lines under my eyes, streaks of gray near my temple. Years given to family, country, strangers. Somehow, I felt more invisible now than I ever did in uniform. A patient call light chimed. Room 214. I pushed the thought down and walked. The hallway floor felt sticky, like someone had mopped but never dried it. Each step echoed, faint but hollow. I paused by a window at the end of the hall. Rain smeared the glass, city lights blurring into streaks. Somewhere out there, Daniel and Beth were toasting with Dad's whiskey. Probably laughing about how strong I'd be without a home. My hand curled into a fist. The cedar chest. The email. Whatever Marcus wanted me to see. I wasn't letting it sit in their storage another day. I turned, heading back to the station. Shift or not, I was done standing still. The rain let up just before dawn. The streets glistened under the orange glow of dying streetlights. I pulled my jacket tighter, the fabric smelling like damp wool and old soap. Walking home, I replayed Marcus's words. The cedar chest. The email. Not just paperwork, he'd said. That tone meant something was buried deep, something someone wanted hidden. I thought about every year I sent checks home. Missed birthdays. Skipped holidays. Friends gone distant because I was always on base or on call. It was supposed to mean something. Dad's legacy. Our family's name. Now my name was nowhere at all. The sidewalk was slick. My boots left faint splashes behind me. In the distance, a delivery truck rumbled, echoing off the empty blocks. I tried to breathe steady, but my chest felt tight, like a hand pressing down. When I reached my apartment, the hallway smelled faintly of fried food and detergent. I unlocked the door, tossed my bag onto the sagging couch, and sank down. My phone buzzed again. Marcus. Remember, tomorrow. Early. Don't tell them. The screen dimmed. The apartment hummed with silence. The kind that presses into your ears. I rubbed my temple and stared at the dog tag still in my coat pocket. Metal warm from my hand. Edges biting just enough to keep me present. A memory hit. Dad at the kitchen table, ink-stained fingers, reading every letter I sent from overseas. He always said, Nora, you're the anchor of this family. Gus anchors get cut loose when the ship's too crowded. The wall clock ticked once, sharp and hollow. Sunlight began to bleed through the blinds, turning the room a dull gray. My eyes burned, but I didn't close them. Tomorrow, I'd walk back into that farmhouse. I'd find that cedar chest, no matter what Daniel or Beth said. And if the email inside told the truth, they'd finally understand who they'd erased. The morning quiet broke with the faint buzz of a helicopter somewhere far off. I froze, listening. Not yet. But soon. The sun barely touched the horizon when I reached the farmhouse. The gravel drive was wet, tire ruts filled with muddy rainwater. Every window was dark, curtains drawn tight. Daniel and Beth were probably still asleep, sleeping well on what was mine too. I killed the truck engine and sat for a moment. The place smelled the same as yesterday. Damp earth, old wood, diesel in the air. But stepping out, I felt like a stranger walking into a place I used to call home. The front porch creaked beneath my boots. The screen door still squealed the same way it did when I was 10. Inside, the air carried that same pine cleaner scent, mixed with dust this time. Like they only cleaned where folks could see. The hallway clock ticked loud, each second snapping in the quiet. I moved slow down the narrow hall, past family photos that stopped featuring me after I turned 30. Beth once joked, "You're like a ghost here, Nora." I guess ghosts don't get inheritance. The storage room door was stiff, hinges groaning as I pushed it open. Stacks of boxes lined the walls, labeled in Daniel's neat handwriting. Farm records. Beth's keepsakes. Nothing with my name. Until I saw it. The cedar chest pushed into a corner, half covered by a tarp. I knelt beside it. The wood smelled faintly of cedar still, though dampness had dulled it. The brass latch clicked when I unhooked it, louder than I expected. Inside, a folded envelope sat on top of old blankets. My father's handwriting on the front. My name. My pulse spiked. Hands trembling, I opened it. Printed email pages slid free, creased but clear. Dad's signature at the bottom, ink faded but sharp enough to read. It transferred ownership of every remaining account. Not to Daniel, not to Beth, but to a trust under my name, dated 3 weeks before he died. I read the last line twice. Nora earned this. Make sure she sees it. The floor creaked behind me. I froze, holding the papers tight. Someone was awake. And I wasn't supposed to be here. The hallway floor creaked again, closer this time. I slid the email pages into my jacket pocket, fingers shaking. The cedar chest still sat open, its lid casting a long shadow across the floor. A voice cut through the quiet. "Why are you here, Nora?" Daniel. His tone was flat, but sharp enough to slice the morning air. I stood, turning slowly. He leaned against the doorway, one hand gripping a steaming mug of coffee. The smell of dark roast drifted into the room, bitter and heavy. His eyes flicked to the chest, then to my pocket. "You went digging." He took a slow sip, eyes never leaving mine. "I told you, Dad wanted us to handle things. You've got your job, your life. Leave the rest to us." Beth's voice floated from the hallway, still groggy. "Danny. Who are you talking to?" Her slippers scraped the hardwood as she approached. I felt my grip tighten on the papers. The weight of them felt heavier than any pack I carried overseas. Daniel's jaw flexed. "Put it back, Nora. Don't make this harder than it already is." He set the mug on a nearby shelf, the ceramic clinking against wood. "Dade trusted us to keep things clean. You don't want to stir up more trouble." Beth appeared behind him, hair messy, robe tied loose. Her perfume still clung to her even this early. Vanilla and musk, thick in the stale air. She looked at the chest, then at me. "Oh, guess the ghost came back." Her smirk widened. "Find anything worth haunting over?" My pulse pounded in my ears. The hallway clock ticked once, loud and hollow. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You need to walk away, Nora. This isn't your fight anymore. Whatever Dad wrote, it won't matter now. We've handled it." I glanced at the open chest, the faint cedar scent mixing with the bitter coffee. The papers in my pocket burned against my hand. One choice, leave quietly, or let them know I wasn't walking out empty-handed. Beth crossed her arms, her nails tapping the wooden doorframe. "So, You gonna pretend you didn't see anything, or make this a scene? I slid my hand deeper into my jacket pocket. The papers felt warm, almost alive, crinkling softly with every breath I took. Daniel watched me, his eyes narrowing, waiting for a fight. Beth tilted her head, her smirk fading just slightly. She could see it too, something had shifted. I wasn't here to beg anymore. I stepped past them, slow but steady. The floor groaned beneath my boots. Neither of them moved to block me, but their silence felt heavy as a wall. At the front door, the faint smell of cedar still clung to my jacket. Rain tapped softly on the porch roof, dripping into the muddy yard below. I opened the door without a word. Behind me, Daniel muttered, low and clipped, "You're making this harder than it has to be." I didn't answer. The cold morning air hit my face like a slap. Each breath stung, sharp and grounding. The papers pressed against my ribs as I crossed the porch. The truck engine coughed before starting, a rough growl that broke the stillness. I pulled onto the road, gravel crunching. Farmhouse shrinking in the rearview mirror. Beth's figure stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching until the curve swallowed her from sight. Halfway back to Harrisburg, my phone buzzed against the dashboard. "Marcus, got confirmation. Meet me tonight. Not at your place. Bring the papers." Another buzz followed seconds later. "It's bigger than the will. Trust me." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. The trees along the road blurred as I pressed the gas a little harder. Whatever Marcus knew, it wasn't just about family land anymore. And if he was involving me now, it meant something official, something public. The rain eased into a mist, coating the windshield like breath on glass. The low hum of rotor blades echoed faintly in my memory, pulling me back to last night. Not yet. But soon. The floor groaned again, louder this time. I slid the email pages into my jacket pocket, careful not to crumple them. The cedar scent clung to my hands, sharp against the stale air. Daniel's voice came from the doorway, low but cutting. "You shouldn't be here, Nora." His silhouette filled the frame, coffee mug steaming in his hand. The smell of dark roast drifted toward me, bitter and heavy. I stood, keeping my jacket closed. His eyes flicked from the cedar chest to my face, reading every move. "You went digging," he said, his tone flat. "Dade trusted us to handle everything. You've got your work, your life. Leave this alone." Beth's slippers scraped against the hallway as she joined him. She yawned, robe loose, perfume still clinging like a cloud. Her gaze landed on the chest, then on me. A slow smile crept across her face. "Wes the ghost found something worth haunting over." Daniel set his mug on the shelf, the ceramic clinking softly. "Whatever Dad wrote down, it won't change things now. We've already sorted everything. Walking away would be easier. For all of us." Beth leaned against the doorframe, nails tapping a slow rhythm. "You always hated being tied down. Why start now?" Her voice dripped with the same syrupy tone she used at the will reading. I kept my hands steady at my sides, the papers pressed tight against my ribs. The hallway clock ticked behind them, each beat louder than the last. They waited for me to argue, to shout, maybe to beg. I didn't. The house felt colder than it had yesterday, shadows stretching long across the floor. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Close it up. Pretend you never came in here. It'll save everyone trouble." I looked at the cedar chest, then at both of them. No words came. Only the weight of everything Dad left behind. Why, and the proof they didn't want me to see. I didn't answer Daniel. Didn't bother sparring with Beth. The papers stayed flat against my ribs, warm from my grip. The cedar scent lingered on my jacket as I passed them. Neither spoke again, just followed me with their eyes, heavy and cold. The hallway clock ticked louder than my footsteps. Each second felt like a door closing behind me. At the front door, rain dripped from the porch roof, soft and steady. The air outside smelled cleaner, fresher, even with the mud and diesel. I stepped into the gray morning, pulling my coat tight. Beth's shadow stretched across the doorway, but she didn't move closer. The truck coughed twice before the engine finally caught. The sound broke the farmhouse silence like a crack in glass. I glanced in the mirror. Daniel stood in the hallway motionless. Beth leaned on the frame, arms crossed, watching until I rolled down the drive. Half a mile out, my phone buzzed against the dashboard. Marcus, need you tonight. Not at your place. Bring the papers. Another buzz followed. This isn't just about the will. Bigger than that. Trust me. My knuckles tightened around the wheel. Trees blurred past as the road wound through soaked fields. Every drop of rain on the windshield sounded louder than my thoughts. Marcus never called things bigger, unless it meant something official, something public. The hum of rotor blades flashed in my memory, faint but distinct. Not yet, I thought, but soon. If this were you, would you confront them now, or wait until the right moment? Comment 1 or 2. The rain hadn't stopped by the time I reached Harrisburg. It came down light, steady, tracing patterns on the windshield as I parked. My apartment felt colder than usual when I stepped inside. The place smelled faintly of mint tea and detergent. I set my jacket on the chair, the cedar scent still clinging to the fabric. The papers stayed in my pocket. I wasn't ready to look at them again. The floor creaked as I crossed to the window. Beyond the glass, the city glowed faintly through a curtain of rain. Somewhere, Daniel and Beth were probably raising glasses, celebrating a farm I kept alive while they called me rootless. I closed my eyes and heard it again, not the rain. Rotor blades. Not from last night. From Kandahar. A night where everything blurred into red dust and blood. I was on the ground, crouched beside a soldier bleeding from his side. The helicopter was circling to land, wind whipping sand against my face. Every shout, every pulse, every second counted. No one cared about names then. Only saving who we could before the rotors lifted us out. My chest tightened, pulling me back to now. I gripped the windowsill, knuckles white. All that sacrifice. All that noise. And now I was standing in silence, erased by my own blood. The wall clock ticked once, sharp. Marcus's name lit up my phone on the table. He didn't call this time, just a message. Keep the papers close. They'll try to make you disappear again. We meet tomorrow. I dropped into the chair, the wood groaning beneath me. The papers rustled as I shifted. Dad's signature, faded but firm, pressed against my leg through the jacket. Proof he hadn't forgotten me. Proof Daniel and Beth lied. The rain softened outside, turning into a thin mist. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and wondered if justice would cost me what little family I had left. Sleep didn't come easy. Every sound outside pulled me awake. Passing cars, a dog barking, the faint buzz of my phone. By dawn, I gave up and brewed coffee strong enough to taste like metal. The kitchen smelled sharp, bitter, steam fogging the window above the sink. The papers sat on the counter, edges curled from being clutched all night. I traced Dad's signature with my fingertip. Ink faded, but every line was steady. He knew. He wanted me to know too. Beth's smirk kept flashing through my head, her nails tapping the doorframe, perfume thick as fog. Daniel's voice, calm but cold. Walking away would be easier. For all of us. They weren't just hiding something. They were counting on me to fold. Like I always did. My phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from an unknown number. You don't know me, but Marcus said you'd need help. Don't trust anyone. Meet us before you confront them. No name, No location. Only coordinates at the bottom of the screen. I swallowed hard. Marcus had pulled strings before, but never like this. Not since we were in uniform. Not since missions where names got erased from records. The heater kicked on, a low hum filling the apartment. I sat at the kitchen table, wrapping my hands around the coffee mug for warmth. The mint tea smell from last night had faded, replaced by scorched beans and tension. The papers stayed close, folded tight in an envelope now. I wouldn't risk losing them. My eyes landed on the framed photo above the counter. Me, Dad, and Mom on the farm porch, summer of '02. Before deployments took over my life. Before Beth learned to sneer and Daniel learned to talk in numbers. Before legacy turned into leverage. The coffee went cold in my hands. Outside, the rain picked up again, soft but relentless. I stood, slid the envelope into my jacket, and grabbed my keys. Whatever waited at those coordinates, it was better than sitting here, waiting for my family to bury me twice. The road out of Harrisburg was slick, fog rolling low over the fields. Each mile felt heavier, like the weight of the papers in my coat was pulling me down. The GPS led me off the main road, past barns and silent silos, toward a narrow dirt path. I pulled over by a rusted gate, engine idling low. The area smelled of wet hay and diesel, wind carrying the faint scent of pine. I checked my phone. The coordinates blinked on the screen, a final text beneath them. Don't bring the papers out yet. Eyes everywhere. A black SUV rolled up behind me, headlights dim. Marcus stepped out first, his jacket zipped to his chin. Breath visible in the cold air. He glanced around before approaching, boots crunching on the gravel. You kept them safe. I patted my jacket. They're here. What's this about? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the SUV's rear door. Inside sat a woman in an army uniform, her hair tied back, eyes steady. Lieutenant Karen Brooks, Marcus said. She's here because this isn't just about your father's will. There's a bigger hand pulling strings, and your name's at the center. Karen nodded once. Your commendation's been cleared, Nora. But if Daniel and Beth find out what it means before the public does, they'll bury you and the trust together. The papers felt heavier than ever against my ribs. I thought of Beth's smirk, Daniel's calm threats, and Dad's faded signature. The farm, the money, the betrayal, all small pieces now compared to whatever this was. Marcus met my eyes. You ready for people to finally see you? Because once this starts, there's no going back. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the distant hum of a rotor through the fog. It wasn't close yet. But it was coming. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. The VA office smelled of toner and old coffee. Machines hummed low, spitting out paper one slow sheet at a time. Karen stood by the counter, her uniform crisp, posture sharp as ever. Marcus leaned on the doorway, arms crossed. His eyes kept scanning the empty hall, every shadow like a possible threat. I sat at the metal table, fingers pressed against a manila envelope. The air felt heavy, like a storm was waiting just beyond the walls. Karen slid a document toward me. Thick stock paper, embossed seal at the top. Your commendation's official now. The president himself will hand it over at the ceremony. The press will be there, and your family will likely hear before anyone else. I traced the seal with my fingertip. It was cold, smooth, and heavier than it looked. 20 years of blood, sweat, and dust distilled into one page. A page my own brother would rather burn than let me hold. Marcus cleared his throat. They can't erase this. Not legally. Not now. But they'll try to make it ugly. They'll spin you as greedy, unstable, whatever sticks. I leaned back, chair legs squealing on the tile. My chest felt tight. I don't want to fight. I just want my father's truth to stand. And maybe, finally, to breathe without feeling erased. Karen's gaze softened just slightly. You won't need to fight. Once the commendations read aloud, they won't touch you. Your trust becomes untouchable, and everyone will know you didn't take. It was given. The printer beeped in the corner, another page sliding free. The faint smell of warm ink mixed with the stale air. Karen gathered the files, stacking them neatly before sliding them into a locked case. Tomorrow morning, you meet us outside Lancaster. The rest will unfold. I nodded, my hands still gripping the envelope tight. Through the glass door, the afternoon light dimmed as clouds rolled in. The wind outside carried the distant hum of a rotor, barely audible, but enough to make my pulse jump. The same sound from Kandahar, the same one whispering through my nights now. Not yet. But soon. I drove back to Harrisburg with the envelope on the passenger seat. The weight of it felt unreal, like carrying something alive. Every bump in the road sent a jolt through my chest. Rain streaked across the windshield, thin but relentless. Farm fields blurred on either side, their edges swallowed by fog. The world felt quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that makes every thought louder. I thought of Dad at the kitchen table, signing those papers. Ink smudged on his fingers, glasses slipping down his nose. He wrote my name like it mattered. Like all those years overseas meant more than just another ghost in a uniform. My phone buzzed against the dashboard. Marcus again. Security detail confirmed. Don't tell anyone where you'll be tomorrow. Not even friends. Not yet. Another buzz followed seconds later. And don't let them bait you tonight. Whatever they say, stay quiet. This ends on our terms. The heater blew warm air into the cab, carrying the faint scent of dust and pine from my coat. My hands stayed tight on the wheel, knuckles pale. For the first time, I didn't want to yell, didn't want to claw back what they took. I just wanted to stand in that field tomorrow and let the truth speak louder than I ever could. Headlights passed on the opposite side, their glow smearing across the wet road. The hum of my tires mixed with the low whistle of wind through the truck's vents. My mind kept circling the same question. Would this bring peace, or just another fracture? As I pulled into my apartment lot, the clouds shifted, breaking just enough for light to cut through. The rain slowed to a drizzle. Somewhere beyond the horizon, faint but sure, came the rhythmic thrum of rotor blades. Each beat steadier, closer than the last. I killed the engine and sat still, envelope in my lap. Tomorrow, everything changes. For me. For them. And there's no taking it back. The wind rattled the window all night. Each gust whistled low, slipping through the cracked frame like a warning. The apartment smelled of mint tea and damp wool from my drying coat. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope. The seal glinted faintly under the weak light. Dad's signature, embossed crest, every line that said I still mattered. And yet, the weight of it felt like a stone in my chest. Across the room, the wall clock ticked, each second stretching longer. I rubbed my thumb over my dog tag, the metal warm from my hand. The grooves felt deeper tonight, like they were tracing every year I gave away. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing against wet pavement. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe slow, but my mind wouldn't quiet. It kept circling back to one thought. Was I ready to let the whole world see me again? In uniform, recognition meant survival. Back then, every salute came with sand in my teeth and blood on my gloves. There was no spotlight, just grit and getting the job done. Now, the spotlight felt heavier than any field pack I ever carried. I poured another cup of tea, the steam rising in lazy curls. The mint scent filled the air, sharp but calming. My reflection stared back from the dark window. Tired eyes, streaks of gray, a face I barely recognized outside scrubs and fatigues. The phone buzzed on the table, screen lighting up. Marcus. Security confirmed. They'll pick you up at dawn. Pack light, Nora. This isn't just a ceremony. It's a message. The tea cooled in my hands as I read it twice. A message. Not just to Daniel and Beth, but to everyone watching. To remind them I wasn't the ghost they made me. I set the mug down, the ceramic tapping softly against wood. The envelope stayed beside me, heavy as ever. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just stand in a field. I'd stand for every year they pretended I didn't exist. Headlights swept across my blinds just after 5. The low rumble of an engine idled outside, steady but impatient. I grabbed the envelope and my coat, the cedar scent still faint in the lining. Outside, the air was sharp, biting against my skin. Marcus stepped from the SUV first, jacket zipped high, breath clouding in the cold. Karen followed, her uniform crisp even at this hour, boots silent on the wet pavement. Marcus's voice carried low, calm but firm. We need to move before sunrise. Beth and Daniel will push harder today. They know something's shifting. I slid into the back seat, the leather cold against my palms. Karen shut the door, the soft thud echoing in the quiet street. The cabin smelled of leather and faint pine from a dangling air freshener. No one spoke for the first few minutes. The tires hummed over the slick roads, each bump a dull reminder of where we were heading. I held the envelope close, the edge pressing into my ribs. Every mile felt like another step away from being invisible. And closer to standing alone in front of everyone. Karen finally broke the silence. The ceremony won't just be a handoff, Nora. It's being broadcast. People will see you. Your commendation will secure your trust. But it'll paint a target too. I turned toward the window, watching the faint glow of morning break through the fog. I didn't ask for a spotlight. I muttered. Karen nodded once. No, but you earned this. And the truth needs a face. Whether you like it or not. Marcus glanced back from the driver's seat, his voice steady. They'll test you, Nora. They'll bait you, maybe even try to block the transport. Stay quiet until we land. Once the president speaks, there's nothing they can do. The road narrowed, trees rising like shadows on both sides. I shifted in my seat, the weight of my dog tag heavy in my palm. Each groove felt like a scar I'd carried home. Tomorrow, it wouldn't just be mine anymore. It would be the story everyone finally saw. The SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of an open field. The grass glistened, heavy with dew, the air sharp enough to sting my throat. In the distance, barns stood like dark silhouettes against the pale morning sky. Karen stepped out first, scanning the horizon. The wind pushed at her jacket, carrying the damp scent of tilled earth and cold metal. Marcus stayed by the door, his gaze steady on me. You're not here to prove anything, Nora. You're here because they can't erase what's real anymore. I exhaled slowly, the cloud of my breath fading into the mist. The envelope stayed against my ribs, every edge memorized by now. I thought of Dad's handwriting, his ink, stained hands, and his words. Make sure she sees it. The field was quiet except for the wind. A lone clock ticked on the SUV's dash, each second sounding louder than the last. My thumb rubbed against my dog tag, tracing the grooves like prayer beads. I wasn't scared of what was coming. I was scared of being seen. After years of being a shadow. Karen's voice cut through the silence. Rotor check inbound. We've got 10 minutes. Her tone was calm, measured, like she'd said it 1,000 times. I stepped out into the field, boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. The sky had that pale gray light right before the sun decides to break through. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but heavy, louder than the wind. Marcus walked beside me, his voice low. Whatever happens, you don't need to explain yourself. Just stand there. Let them see what they tried to bury. The first faint hum reached us, distant but distinct, a sound I knew by heart. Not from nightmares this time. Not from war. From the moment my life stopped being a ghost. Before we move forward, have you ever stood in a moment like this, where everything you lost was about to face the truth? Share your story below. Someone listening might need it tonight. The farmhouse glowed warm against the dark field. Golden light spilled from every window, shadows of people moving behind the curtains. Laughter floated through the wind, carried over the damp grass like an echo I didn't want. The porch smelled faintly of roast turkey and cinnamon. Through the glass, I saw Beth raise her glass high, her smile wide and sharp. Daniel clapped someone on the back, his easy grin as smooth as his lies. I stayed in the shadows near the porch steps. The cedar scent of my jacket mixed with the damp earth beneath my boots. The envelope stayed tucked inside, the paper edges digging into my ribs. Each dig reminded me why I wasn't inside, laughing with them. Marcus stood a few feet back, coat collar up against the wind. His gaze stayed on the tree line, scanning the dark. Karen adjusted the strap of her field pack, her face unreadable in the porch light. Inside, someone tapped a spoon against a glass, calling for a toast. The sound was sharp, almost mocking in the quiet outside. Beth's voice carried, sweet but loud. "To family," she said, pausing for effect. "And to what's finally ours." A soft cheer followed, muffled through the walls. I felt my jaw tighten, my breath fogging in the cold air. Every year I sent checks. Every holiday I spent on base while they toasted by this same fire. And still, I was the ghost in the yard. The wind picked up, rattling the porch railing. Karen's voice was low, steady. "Chopper's on standby. We've got 1 hour." Her tone wasn't impatient. Just factual, like she was reading a weather report. I kept my eyes on the windows, on the shifting shadows inside. They didn't know what was coming. Not yet. And I hadn't decided if I'd let them know. Before the blades touched down, the porch boards creaked under my weight as I shifted closer to the steps. The farmhouse smelled like home and betrayal all at once. Wood smoke, turkey, and the faint hint of Beth's perfume drifting through the cracked window. Inside, Daniel's voice rose above the chatter. "You know, Dad always said I'd be the one to keep this place thriving." A pause, then laughter, low and approving. I felt my teeth pressed together hard. Dad never said that. At least, not when I was listening. Karen stayed by the SUV, arms folded. Her breath hung in the cold, little clouds fading into the wind. Marcus moved closer to me, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. "They're celebrating like nothing changed," he murmured. "Doesn't matter what's on those papers. Yet." I nodded, my thumb tracing the edge of the envelope beneath my coat. The paper felt almost warm against the cold night air. A reminder of what Dad actually wrote, what he wanted. The farmhouse windows glowed brighter as more lights came on. The laughter grew louder, sharper, each burst slicing through the quiet yard. A faint hum rolled in from the distance. Not the chopper yet, but a low drone of wind moving through the valley. Karen's radio crackled softly. "Pilot reports clear skies. 15 out if we give the word." Her tone stayed even, calm as ever. But I saw her eyes flick to me, waiting. I leaned against the porch rail, the wood cool and rough beneath my palms. Inside, someone struck up a song, voices rising in uneven harmony. It was the kind of song Dad used to hum after harvests, back when we were all still family. Now it felt like a mockery, a tune for a celebration I wasn't invited to. Marcus's voice was low, deliberate. You don't need to speak tonight, Nora. Not a word. Tomorrow does the talking for you. I nodded again, but my chest tightened just the same. Being silent didn't make the sting any less real. The night deepened, the air colder, sharper. The porch light flickered once, casting the yard in brief shadow. I tightened my coat, the cedar scent faint but grounding. From the trees, the faintest thrum drifted in. A pulse, low and steady. Not close yet, but enough to pull my breath short. Karen caught it too, her hand lifting to her earpiece. Standby confirmed. They're circling east, waiting on our signal. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low. They'll hear it before they see it, and when they do, don't look back at the house. Just keep your eyes ahead. Through the window, Beth laughed again, loud and ringing. Her shadow danced on the curtain, wine glass raised high. Daniel stood beside her, his posture easy, his smile broad. Neither had a clue what was about to cut through their celebration. I glanced toward the open field beyond the yard. The grass swayed under the wind, silver in the porch light. Each gust carried the sound of the valley, the faint thrum growing steadier, closer, with every passing minute. My fingers brushed the edge of the envelope again, hidden deep inside my coat. Dad's words felt heavier now, not just for me, but for everyone watching tomorrow. He hadn't left me behind. They did, and now the whole county would know it. Karen's voice broke the silence. Signal in 10. Pilots waiting. Her tone was calm, but her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. I took one last look at the glowing windows, the silhouettes moving in their warm bubble of light. The laughter, the music, all of it muffled by the wind. Then I turned to the dark field, the sound of rotor blades drawing closer with every breath. Tomorrow, they'd stop laughing. And I wouldn't need to say a word. The first flash of light swept over the field. A white beam, slicing through fog, followed by the deep thrum of rotor blades. The sound rolled across the yard, shaking loose leaves from the sycamores. The farmhouse windows flickered as shadows shifted inside. Someone opened the front door, the golden light spilling onto the porch. Laughter died mid-note as the thrum grew louder, steadier, filling the night. Beth was the first to step outside, robe trailing behind her. Her wine glass tilted in her hand, liquid sloshing onto the wooden rail. Daniel followed, his expression sharp, brow furrowed as he scanned the dark. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, his voice barely carrying over the wind. Karen stood at my side, her stance calm but ready. Her jacket whipped in the gust, boots planted firm in the wet soil. Marcus adjusted his headset, his voice low into the mic. Signal clear. Touchdown confirmed. The rotor wash hit us first, a wave of cold wind and grit. It carried the damp scent of the field. Wet grass, churned earth, faint diesel from the chopper. The sound grew deafening, rattling the farmhouse windows and knocking over a porch chair. The helicopter's landing lights cut through the fog, casting long shadows across the yard. Beth stumbled back a step, shielding her eyes. Daniel gripped the porch rail, his knuckles pale in the glow. Neither spoke. Neither moved closer. The bird descended slow, deliberate, its landing skids sinking slightly into the damp ground. The rotors slowed but stayed loud, their echo rolling over the silent crowd gathering at the doorway. Faces lined the windows now. Neighbors, friends, curious guests frozen in place. Karen's hand rested lightly on my arm. "You walk when I tell you. No rush. Let them see every step." The wind tugged at my coat, the cedar scent mixing with the cold night air. The envelope stayed firm against my ribs. I kept my eyes forward, away from Beth's glare and Daniel's tight jaw. The side door of the helicopter swung open with a metallic snap. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, boots sinking into the wet field. Their movements were sharp, precise, unbothered by the staring crowd. One of them lifted a hand in salute as they approached. The two officers stopped a few feet from me, boots firm in the wet grass. One held a sealed folder, edges marked with the presidential crest in gold. The other glanced toward the porch, voice steady over the fading rotor hum. Major Nora McKenna, step forward. Karen nodded once. Your moment, she murmured. The wind caught her words, carrying them past my shoulder like a whisper. I took a slow step, then another, boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The field lights from the helicopter stretched my shadow long across the grass. Every face at the farmhouse watched. Neighbors, distant cousins, and the two siblings who thought I'd vanished. Beth's wineglass tilted until it slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the porch, shards glinting under the floodlight. Daniel didn't move, his jaw set, fingers gripping the porch rail hard enough to whiten his knuckles. The lead officer opened the folder, voice projecting clearly across the yard. By order of the President of the United States, and with gratitude for 20 years of service and sacrifice, Major Nora McKenna is hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Commendation. The wind caught the page as he turned it, snapping it sharply. He handed the document to Karen, who passed it into my hands. The weight was more than paper. Embossed seal, Dad's trust attached, proof I wasn't the ghost they painted me to be. Murmurs rippled from the porch as the second officer spoke. The McKenna Family Trust, as per Mr. McKenna's signed directive, is confirmed in Major Nora McKenna's name. Effective immediately. Beth's lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel finally let go of the porch rail, stepping forward a half-step, only to stop when Karen shifted slightly toward him, calm but unyielding. I stood still, the commendation steady in my hands. No words, no need. The paper said everything my voice didn't have to. The cold air stung my cheeks, mixing with the heat building behind my ribs. The officers saluted once more, their movements crisp, deliberate. The helicopter lights swung toward the field again, waiting for me to board. Behind me, the farmhouse had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. The officers stepped aside, clearing the path to the waiting helicopter. Its landing lights spun slowly, painting the wet grass in sweeping arcs of white and gold. The rotor blades picked up speed, a rising hum that filled every corner of the field. I adjusted my coat, the cedar scent rising again as the wind tugged at the fabric. The commendation rested in one hand, the trust papers tucked close against my ribs. Neither felt heavy anymore. Just certain. The porch behind me stayed silent. Beth's arms were crossed tight, her robe whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on me. Daniel's hands rested at his sides, stiff, unmoving. Guests hovered in the doorway, some clutching coats, others frozen mid-step. No one spoke. No one dared. Karen's voice carried through the gusts, calm and clear. Board when ready, Major. Her words were even, steady, as if this were just another routine extraction. I walked forward, boots pressing into the damp soil with each step. The gusts kicked up loose leaves and blades of grass, swirling in the spinning light. Each step felt measured, not rushed, not slow. Just steady, like every mile I'd walked to reach this moment. At the helicopter's side door, Marcus offered his hand. I gripped it once firm, before pulling myself inside. The cabin smelled of oil and cold metal, the seats vibrating gently as the engines pushed harder. Through the open door, I glanced back just once. The farmhouse stood glowing behind the swirl of fog and wind. Beth's figure blurred in the porch light, Daniel's outline sharp beside her. Neither followed. Neither moved closer. The door sealed with a heavy thunk, muting the howl of the wind. The rotors roared, lifting us from the ground, the field shrinking beneath us with each beat. The guests below looked up, their faces pale in the spotlight glow. The sound of the chopper swallowing whatever words they might have had. I kept my eyes forward as the field faded from view. The night swallowed the farmhouse. The only sound left was the steady hum of the engines and the faint rustle of papers that proved I'd never been a ghost at all. A week later, the city felt quieter than I expected. Washington had its hum, traffic, sirens, the low murmur of distant horns. But in my small apartment near DuPont, mornings carried a softer sound. The blinds filtered pale sunlight across the hardwood floor. Steam rose from my mug, the mint tea scent filling the still air. Beside me, a stack of handwritten letters lay tied with twine. Notes from women I hadn't met yet. Widows, medics, veterans who heard about the fund we'd launched. The commendation hung on the wall, its gold crest catching the morning light. Below it sat the trust papers, framed but simple. They weren't trophies. They were anchors, reminders that I didn't imagine any of it. Dad's words, his signature, still spoke when I didn't need to. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop, brakes squealing faintly. The city moved on, indifferent to who I was or what happened in Lancaster. And somehow, that was comforting. Here, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I wasn't the medic scraping for scraps of home. I was just Nora, and that was finally enough. I opened one of the letters, the paper soft and worn at the folds. A woman from Ohio wrote, "I thought I was the only one they erased. Your story made me believe I can start over." The ink blotted a little near the edges, like she cried while writing it. I folded it carefully and set it atop the stack. These were the voices I wanted near me now. Not Daniel's clipped remarks. Not Beth's sharp perfume and sharper words. Just women who understood what it felt like to lose. And still stand. The office smelled like fresh coffee and warm paper. A new space near DuPont Circle, with sunlight streaming through wide glass windows. The hardwood floors creaked softly as people shuffled in, voices low but warm. It wasn't a big event. Just the first meeting for the fund. 6 women sat in the circle, chairs arranged loose, nothing formal. Some wore jeans, others still in scrubs from their morning shifts. All of them carried the same look I'd once worn. The mix of exhaustion and grit that comes when the world knocks you down, but you're still standing anyway. One woman, Carla, a Navy vet from Texas, tapped her coffee cup nervously. "Feels strange, doesn't it? Being in a room where no one's judging you for what you lost." Her voice cracked slightly, but she smiled when another woman nodded. I listened more than I spoke. These weren't speeches or charity handouts. This was about building something steady. A space where we could share, plan, breathe again. Every dollar from the trust, every bit from the commendation bonus, went straight into this, brick by brick. The sound of quiet laughter rose near the back. 2 widows swapped stories about jobs they were starting next month. Their voices felt lighter than the heavy silences I'd grown used to. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something warm settle in my chest. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just a sense that maybe I wasn't standing alone anymore. This room, these women, this small beginning. It felt closer to family than anything I'd left behind in Lancaster. I stood by the window, the late morning light warming the side of my face. The city buzzed outside, a faint hum of traffic and footsteps. But inside, the air felt calm, alive, like maybe the legacy I'd been chasing wasn't land or money, but this. That night, the city lights flickered softly through my blinds. The sound of traffic below was distant, more like a hum than a noise. I sat at my small kitchen table, mug of mint tea steaming in my hands. The commendation hung on the wall across from me. The trust papers framed beneath it, simple and still. They didn't feel like trophies. They felt like proof I hadn't imagined all those years of sacrifice. Proof I wasn't a ghost, no matter how they'd tried to write me out. I flipped through a few of the letters from the women we'd met. Their words carried more weight than any property line in Lancaster ever could. Each one reminded me why I left, why I'd never walk back through that farmhouse door again. The wind rattled the window once, a cool draft slipping through the frame. I pulled my sweater tighter, setting the mug on the table. Through the glass, the city looked endless. Street lamps, headlights, towers glowing faintly against the night sky. For the first time, I didn't think about Daniel's cold stare, or Beth's perfume lingering in the hall, or the farm I'd once thought was the only piece of home I had left. None of that mattered anymore. My legacy wasn't tied to a stretch of land. It was here, in this apartment, in that new office space, in the voices of women who found a place to breathe again because we built it. Dad's trust gave me a start. But the rest? That was mine to make, piece by piece. I took a slow sip of tea, the warmth settling deep in my chest. The clock on the wall ticked soft and steady, each second pulling me further from the farmhouse and closer to whatever came next. If you've ever been erased but found your way back, share your story below. Someone listening tonight might need to know they aren't alone. Looking back, I realized the will wasn't what broke me. It was the years I spent believing I had to fight for a place in a family that never wanted me there. That night, leaving on the helicopter, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I just felt free. Free from proving myself to people who only saw me as convenient when they needed help. Dad's trust, the commendation, the fund we built, they weren't about revenge. They were about finding a way forward, about making sure no one else felt as invisible as I once did. The lesson wasn't about reclaiming what I'd lost. It was about seeing that legacy isn't land or money or even a name on a piece of paper. Legacy is what you choose to build when the old doors close. It's the voices you lift up, the lives you touch, and the strength you carry when no one's watching. And maybe, for the first time, I wasn't standing alone anymore.